question here from Warwick. Warwick, did you want to ask your question, or would you like me to? If not, I can ask it for you.
Hi, sure. Thanks, Michael. I was just wondering about your model and, you know, if you shift the risk to the banks rather than to the borrowers, presumably the banks will become much more risk averse and there'll be a lot less lending. And just curious about your response to that and what impact that might have.
Well, I think you're right, Warwick. I'd put it that they might actually be a bit more responsible. And if a bank officer, I'll go back a bit. I'm 71. I remember in my younger days that bank managers really did take an interest in the local businesses that they were lending to, right? They knew the people personally who were the heads of these businesses, and they knew how they were trading, and they would make decisions to lend to those local businesses. Over time, and I think again Sam alluded to it, the banks have just become, you know, financing property. The National Bank has tried to move a bit more back into financing small business, but we need our banks to become professional managers who understand what's happening in the economy, what's happening in their local area, what's happening with their businesses, and making decisions in conjunction with the entrepreneurs about where money gets allocated to the best advantages of society. And so it certainly changes the dynamic in the bank. And I would hope that people who in those roles begin to recognise that they have to add more value than simply providing some sort of algorithm to assess, will I lend on this house or not, which is basically what happens now, you know. So.
Thanks, Michael. Andrew or Sam, did you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. We're 100% Warwick, you're right. If banks are responsible for the loans they give, absolutely no doubt credit would tighten up like crazy. What's happening at the moment is that the banks they have no, as Michael said, they have no moral hazard. They have absolutely no connection to the loans they give. And because like one of the secrets of banking, I think when everyone understands how banks lend money and create money, you know, it doesn't really cost them anything to grant these loans. Most of the time, it's just them buying the promissory note and then granting the deposits in their books onto the borrower's account. So really, if banks were made responsible for their lending, no doubt that credit would shrink up like that. But that's the fundamental problem, is that why is it that private banks have the monopoly on the distribution of credit? You know, because when they're doing it in these systems they have now, they're just pumping into financial markets. They're responsible. The banks are responsible for our housing bubble, for all these financial bubbles that occur over the world. And so it's one of the the philosophical debate must be had, is that how do we reclaim control over the issue of credit, the issuance of money itself. And so my proposal of national banking is just one of the simplest methods of reclaiming the ability to lend currency, because personally, I don't reckon the private bank should possess this monopoly much longer. You know, it's just been, we've seen the devastation and the destitution that it's resulted in. So there's many different methods, but I reckon a national banking system is that's my proposal how to go.
So Sam, I wouldn't disagree that you, even with what I'm suggesting about nationalising the money supply, you could still have a national bank that, in addition to the other commercial banks, ran as a competitor to demonstrate, you know, what the cost base could be and how, you know, a professional bank ought to function. But if we're saying that the reduction in credit is a bad thing, it would only be a bad thing if there weren't other sources. And if at the same time we were pumping money in via a universal basic income, if at the same time the government was either borrowing and or having money created to finance infrastructure and so on, and spending that money into the economy, then the banking sector itself becomes much less important, and it becomes potentially then another way of competitively putting money into the economy, so long as they're on a truly competitive basis, which they're not at the moment. I mean, basically they've got a monopoly and no risk. So yeah, as I said right at the very beginning, I can see the things that Andrew have spoken about in terms of having complementary currencies at the city level, with a national bank, with our money supply nationalised, so it won't matter ultimately whether you've got your money with a national bank or with a commercial bank. You're never at risk for your deposit, but we've got different ways of financing both normal market transactions and transactions that are not currently covered, such as volunteering and so on. And all of these things should compete competitively to deliver, in fact, a much better service overall to us. So, yeah, I don't necessarily see it's one thing or the other here amongst the three of us. I think we are literally, Andrew, complementary.
Thanks for that. Andrew, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, I just wanted to comment that the speed of trust is something that really comes in here, whether we're trusting the banks as they currently are or whether we think there's a redesign desirable. Yes, so I'd recommend the reading of The Speed of Trust by Stephen M.R. Covey, or his subsequent book, Smart Trust, which differentiates smart trust where you're considering a person's reputation and abilities, as opposed to blind trust, where you're just like giving loans as according to an algorithm, as I think Michael was saying. Yeah, so trust is a big issue with regards to the banking system and how we got it designed, and whether we can be input into the redesign of the system. Yeah, so that's basically my point there. But the other part, of course, is to acknowledge that other money systems are possible. Just admitting that they are possible opens your mind to the possibility that there are different rules, and with the different rules, some it's like when you plant put a plant in the ground, it'll take advantage of whichever part of soil is nearby, whether it's under a rock and being as a sort of rock mulch, or whether it's just an open ground or whatever. It'll take advantage of whatever the environment is around it that it nurtures and grows it. So with the economic systems, whichever currency supports what your need is at the time, you go for that. Sorry, okay. Rambling and ranting.
No, that's great. We have another question from John A, who's asked, how do we get broader traction, generate more general awareness of these critiques of banking? Would anyone like to respond to that?
I tried it with the letter to the editor for the Newcastle Herald, the one that you read out for me, Monique. So yeah, letters to the editor, sort of when it's topical, when something that has happened in the bank, you can comment in the public forum as to what might have been done differently.
Well, I can say, I started this journey in 1980 and wrote a 700 pages thesis on it, and really, I have to say I'm probably most optimistic now of any time in that 30 years, given the advances in things like positive money initiative in the UK and universal banking, basic income initiatives and so on. I do think there is much more awareness that the way the system is working is not working. And so how we get our particular critiques out, one of the ways is through the opportunities that NENA have provided, talking on other forums, and yeah, it's a long, hard road to hoe.
Well, I personally believe the system of banking is the biggest scam in the history of mankind. And I think when people understand banking for the very first time, they go, really? Are you serious? That's how it works? They create money? It's like a light goes on. People like wake up and they're like, no way. It's definitely, and I reckon more and more people are understanding it's an exponential growth. And so I personally believe we just got to be talking more and more to more and more, but just to whoever will listen, just to be explaining the system of banking, explaining fractional reserve lending and debt-based currencies, credit lending. And honestly, I reckon we'll have enough exponential growth that we'll be able to promote these ideas of, you know, alternative monetary systems, because if we don't, I'll get
yeah, making films too, Sam. I think that's
well, that was the purpose, the idea of getting the ideas into the public domain. So
Right. Yeah.
it's there's a quote from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. It's there is a tide in the affairs of men, whilst taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, and the entirety of their lives are bound in shallows and in misery. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current as it serves, or lose our ventures. So it's quite apt for the situation of banking knowledge.
I think so. And just coming back to, I had a question coming back to one of the things you were saying, Sam, about, you know, if the current banking system is not going to be sort of sustainable, given some of the crises that we're having at the moment and will probably continue to have with climate disruption upon us. So if there was one thing that each of you could do to make our, I guess, our sort of peer-to-peer economic system more sustainable, what would you do? So I wanted to ask that of each of you.
One thing to do, admit that there's multiple currencies possible. And second point would be simply to relax in one regard, because sustainability will always be re-established, for the unsustainable is unsustainable.
Okay, thank you. Michael, Sam?
in the context of the banking system, again, we need to have a way of re-engaging the local, quotes, bank manager into the local communities, because so much of what the decisions that are made about whether it's pollution or, you know, destroying of soils or water or whatever, those decisions are more and more made remotely. It's like right now we've got the Bank of India proposing to lend to Adani, right? Now, if the decisions about lending are being made by a senior person within a local community about things that affect the local community, it is going to be more sustainable. The one thing that also encourages me is that in a past life, I used to be manufacturing manager for Toyota, and I continue to follow what's happening in manufacturing. And with the advent of nanotechnology, 3D printing, artificial intelligence, and so on, we are getting to the stage where we can, and also renewable energy, we can bring back manufacturing to local regions where it's set up in such a way that the impacts on the local environment are negligible, and we're basically moving electrons around the world as designs that are then manufactured and made locally, instead of atoms, which are all the bits and pieces that we currently shift through the supply chain. And so the way in which we begin to make things, local food grown in local food factories, and by that I mean green food factories, and lab grown meat products that are, you know, ethical and still healthy for you. There's lots of advantages that are, or advances that are happening, which encourage me to think that we might squeak through the next 30 years.
Fingers crossed. Sam, did you want to? We might finish up with Sam as our last sort of comment for the session.
Yeah, well, my one thing would be to establish the bank which would be able to utilize the national credit, because the private banking system itself is not sustainable. A debt-based fiat currency system is always exponentially growing. It will always require more and more debt. So to me, the national priority should be to regain control over the issuance of currency from the monopoly of private bankers, and reclaim the ability to issue the national credit into nationally productive areas. So that's my take.
Thank you. So it's probably time for us to wrap up now. Were there any final comments that anyone wanted to make? I believe, do we have a finance hub in NENA? Are any of you involved with that?
I'm not, no. I think you've got a universal basic income hub, which I have joined, but there's not that much activity on it.
Isn't there? Yeah.
Universal Basic Income Australia initiative, which is a little bit.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been to a couple meetings of the public banking in Newcastle for NENA, just a hub of that. So, yeah, right. Maria Shea and Barry Diff.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, I just wanted to thank you all for your time. And I think, you know, there's a lot of food for thought in what you've put forward. And, you know, I hope, as you say, Michael, that things are progressing in a positive direction. And I think, you know, certainly we're all bringing our passion to this change, and it does feel like the right time for some change, especially given the Royal Commission on the recent Royal Commission on Banking, and the sort of the situation that we've been in with COVID, with JobKeeper and JobSeeker. It does seem right for change. So thanks so much for your time, and thanks everyone for coming along. And I believe it's probably lunchtime now. Okay, can we just have a round of applause for the speakers? Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Monique, and thank you for everybody who.
Okay, thank you. Bye.